my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I have another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we're going to be talking about The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. You guys, I am so excited to talk about this book. If you've been around for a while, you probably know Margaret Atwood is my all-time favorite author. She has written so many books that mean so much to me. So when word started circulating that this was going to be coming out in September, I got excited. This is the long-awaited sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale was published in early to mid-80s, I think maybe 85. And like, we've literally been waiting 30 years for this book. Margaret said that in writing this book, she kept in mind all of the questions that we had all been asking over the years about the inner workings of Gilead. She said our questions would be answered, and they were. This book takes place 15 years after the events of The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale was, of course, Offred's story. This book is told from 3 separate points of view, and they're all characters that we know of from before. The first perspective that it's from is that of Aunt Lydia, which, if you've read the book and you've seen the show, which I love the show is just finished season 3. It's fantastic. The casting's amazing. The storytelling is just so good. So Aunt Lydia. The next 2 perspectives are told from 2 teenage girls. One is a child that's grown up in Gilead. Her name is Agnes, and we know that Angus used to be Hannah, who used to be Offred's daughter. And then the third point of view is from that of a girl who grew up knowing herself as Daisy. But she soon finds out that her real name is Nicole. And especially if you've watched The Handmaid's Tale show, you know all about baby Nicole. That is the second child of Offred. And Offred, of course, had been very instrumental in smuggling baby Nicole out of Gilead and getting her to Canada. So throughout the story, we're cycling through these perspectives. It kind of goes in order. It'll go, Lydia, Daisy, Angus. Agnes. I keep saying Agnes. No, I keep saying Angus, like Angus beef, instead of Agnes, which is her name. So if I slip up, just know that I know. What I really loved about this book was how we got to know more about how things work for the aunts and for the children of commanders. So like the children who grew up there who were now on the cusp of becoming the wives of the commanders. They were growing up because in Gilead they are married off very young. Like when we meet Agnes, she is, just about marrying age, and she's like 14, 15. She's very young. And they're already preparing the girls for when they get married. And how it works, especially if you are a higher up family, like a family of the commander, the girl is brought 3 prospective husbands. And these husbands are chosen by the aunts, the prospectives, because here's how it works in Gilead, as we're told. The aunts keep a very, very comprehensive list of family trees. Because when women get desperate, like handmaids, as was the case for Offred when Commander Waterford could not get her pregnant, Mrs. Waterford took matters kind of into her own hands and had their family driver, Nick, impregnate Offred. So the aunts know all of the inner workings, and so they keep very strict family trees so that when it comes time to marry these children off, they can know who their actual parents are, and they can check and double check and make sure no accidental incest is happening. So that's a smart idea. So then 3 options are brought to the girls, and then they have to pick, although really their parents pick, their father especially. And while officially the girl has picked, she's been pressured into choosing the correct one in order to make her family standing better, So a lot of these girls are very terrified and traumatized. A lot of them have had bad experiences with older men as young girls, and they've been too scared to tell anybody, so it's left a bad taste in their mouth, so to say, and a lot of them are just very afraid. Because of course, when Gilead first formed, a lot of these people came in already married. Like Mr. and Mrs. Waterford, they were already married when they came to Gilead. Like, they didn't come to Gilead, when Gilead was formed. So, you know, those weddings were more pre-formed, consensual. Now we have the generations coming up after of children who have been born and raised in Gilead, and they're scared. But like Agnes says at the beginning, she says, you know, people might have a lot of questions about Gilead and being a child of Gilead, but the truth is, she's like, you know, while you might be expecting me to tell you all kinds of horrors, the truth is the majority of the children were loved and cherished. Which, of course they were. You know, it's just a different world. And because one of the reasons why Gilead was formed by the people, because of course Gilead is what used to be the United States of America. So Gilead was formed, one of the reasons being the quickly declining birth rate. They needed a way to be able to control the people who were able to have children. And it's very traumatic. So we're not going to get too much into that stuff because that was all covered in The Handmaid's Tale. It's not touched on so much in here, like how that happens, the ceremonies, the way that the handmaids are treated. This isn't about the handmaids so much. This is more about the aunts. And that's another thing I loved. I loved learning about the inner workings, the sort of day-to-day life of the aunts in Ardua Hall. So of course, Aunt Lydia, by this time, when this book is taking place, she is quite elderly. She's in her 70s, I would guess mid to late 70s maybe. And because in The Handmaid's Tale, she was already middle-aged at that point. So we get to know more about her part in forming Gilead, because she was there from the beginning. She's one of the founding aunts. She's the one who came up with a lot of the rules and regulations for the women in Gilead, the wives, the handmaids, the aunts themselves. And so she has a lot to do with all of that. And it was really interesting hearing her story from the day she was taken from her job. She was a judge before this. I know in the show they kind of make it look more like she was a Catholic school teacher, but in this she was a judge. And she's, you know, it tells us the story of how she was taken, the way they were treated when they were taken, how they were sort of tested and brought into it, this kind of strength they needed to have, the kind of resolve. And Aunt Lydia at that time, she vowed that no matter what happened, no matter what she had to do, like she'd do what she had to do now in the present to make things run smoothly and to keep things going. But she vowed right from that beginning that she would have some sort of justice. And she does. Anyway, so it's just so interesting to learn about the ins and outs of that. Then up in Canada, we have Daisy, who we know is baby Nicole. What happens for her is she was raised by two parents, Melanie and Neil, who we learn were part of the Mayday Operative. And Mayday is the group of people, a lot of them formerly people from Gilead who managed to get out, and they are helping smuggle other people who are trying to escape from Gilead out. So we learned that they were pretty high up, and at one point, Nicole, wanting to take part in a protest that was happening at her school. It was a protest against Gilead, and she wanted to take part, and her parents told her she couldn't. She doesn't know at this point that she's baby Nicole. And she finds a way to go anyway, and she ends up on TV. And then shortly after that, her two parents, who she knows as her parents, are killed. And from there, things really kind of quickly accelerate, and the people, all other people from the Mayday, are helping her and telling her what she needs to do. They tell her that for years there's been an inside source from Gilead who's been helping them, who's been feeding them information, and how now it's time for her to return to Gilead to help them further. So she's very scared. She's lived in Canada her whole life. She knows nothing of Gilead. And so they tell her, they train her on what she's going to do. And how it's going to happen is, every so often from Gilead, two women come up, and they're called Pearl Girls. They're dressed all in silver, they're wearing pearls, and their mission is to travel around Canada and try to convert people to come back to Gilead with them. So the people who are working with Nicole, they tell her, okay, we're going to pretend you're homeless, and when the Pearl Girls come and they try to convert you, the first time, don't go for it. But the second time, because of course you don't want to seem too eager, because that will appear suspicious. She said, but the second time they come, go with them. And as she's getting ready to go, they have her tattooed. And they have the words God and love tattooed on her arm. But they do it so that the lettering is kind of raised up off her arm. At that point, there's no explanation given as to why they've done that. But so the sisters come, they take her back to Canada. And the way that they do it is one of the Pearl Girls stays behind. And then the recruit dresses up as the Pearl Girl. That way it's two coming in, two going out. And then the next one stays and tries to recruit another one, and then the two of them go out. Because it can't be known that they're coming in and smuggling people out of Canada into Gilead. Because the aim of the Canadian government is to get Gilead shut down. Like the fall of Gilead, of course, is the goal. So, meanwhile, back in Gilead, Agnes is there, and she's in school, and it's just about time for her to be getting married. And one of her friends, a girl named Becca, is also about to get married, and right before she she attempts to take her own life, and that doesn't go well, because that's very frowned upon in Gilead. Gilead has very, very, very strict rules. And if you haven't read The Handmaid's Tale and want to learn more about those rules, definitely do that. But eventually, Becca she begs and pleads to the aunts to take her. And they do. They take her, how the aunts will take you. You can't just show up at the door and become an aunt, but if you go there and you say that you feel in your heart that there is a higher calling for you, it can be arranged. You're not an aunt immediately. There's like a 6-month period where they are, kind of seeing how you fit in. Then you become a Pearl Girl, and then after that you are a official aunt. So Becca gets taken into there. For Agnes, she has her list of prospective husbands, and the one that her father is very much insistent that she marry is a man named Commander Judd, and he's very, very, very high up in the rankings, and he's had many, many wives in the past that have all mysteriously died. And so that's who her family wants her to marry, so she picks him, and he's very old. So her stepmother, because the mother she had passed away at the beginning of the book from a illness. I'm thinking like cancer, but it's never called cancer. So her stepmother of sorts, although there's no parental relationship with either her father or this stepmother, she just kind of feels as though she's there, she's kind of like, he's old, he'll die off soon, and then you can find another husband. Like, it'll be fine. Just pick him, because it'll give you higher standing, and you'll have more Marthas, and it'll be great. So she's like, okay. Anyway, before she gets married, Aunt Lydia shows up at her house one day when her parents are not home. And Aunt Lydia's kind of like, see, you picked Commander Judd. And Angus is kind of like, yep. And Aunt Lydia's like, you know, if you find that you have a higher calling, you could always come and talk to the aunts and see what can be done about that. And she's kind of like encouraging her to do that without outrightly doing it. And then Aunt Lydia leaves. Agnes decides that that is what she is going to do. So from there, her and Becca are part of the aunts in Ardua Hall. They're working together. So these things aren't happening at the same time because Agnes is older than Nicole. So as we're seeing them, they're at similar ages, but really this was happening in different time periods, slightly different time periods. And so eventually, it's 9 years later, Becca and Agnes are getting set, you know, they're aunts at this point. Becca is Aunt Immortelle and Agnes is Aunt Victoria, because they choose their own name when they're officially aunts. So I'm gonna stop you right here, or stop me right here, and say from here on out is gonna be spoilers for the ending of the book. So if you don't want the spoilers, now's the time to get the heck out of here. I 100% recommend reading the Testaments if you have read The Handmaid's Tale. You definitely want to have that story, know that story before you go into this one. It's not a standalone book. But I would wholeheartedly recommend it. It was so good. I loved hearing more about what had happened to Gilead, to the people, you know, and it's so good. I recommend. So thank you for watching. Now for the rest of us, let's get going. So at this point, like I said, it's been 9 years later. Agnes and Becca are living in Ardua Hall with Aunt Lydia and all the other aunts, because that's where all the aunts of the city live. And eventually, Nicole gets smuggled into Gilead, and she is brought to Ardua Hall, where she is put in an apartment with Agnes and Becca. And she's going to live with them. Aunt Lydia's like, Aunt Lydia knows. That's the thing. Aunt Lydia knows that this is Nicole. She doesn't think this is just some new kid. The name Nicole has chosen is Jade, so they, you know, she's introduced around as Jade, but Lydia knows that it's Nicole, and Nicole knows that she's Nicole. So eventually, Lydia tells Agnes and Becca that she is Nicole. That's a lot to process. And when she tells them, it's after Agnes has been getting a lot of reports on her desk. Because here's the thing, when you become a full-blown aunt, you get to learn how to read. Because one of the things about Gilead is that the women are not allowed to read. And the punishment for a woman reading is severe. And so, of course, the children being raised in Gilead are not taught to read. But if you become an aunt, you're allowed to learn. Can you imagine not teaching women to read? Anyway, so at this point, Agnes and Becca know how to read because they're full-blown aunts. And Agnes has been getting a lot of reports put on her desk. She doesn't know where they're coming from. She doesn't know who's putting them there. But as she's reading them, it's the reports, files on a lot of commanders and commanders' wives and things like that. And the reports of really bad things that these people inside Gilead have been doing. Because of course, if you've grown up in a place and it's all you know, you don't fully understand. You can't look at it logically as though, like, what the hell's going on here? Because not only have they not lived anywhere else, they don't hear of anywhere else. Like, they are completely isolated and cut off from the rest of the world. The people of Gilead only know about Gilead. They know other places exist, but they don't know how things are done there. And they're taught, like, places that the other places are just like, they're just filled with degenerates who are, you know, just the scum of the earth because they don't follow so strictly the rules of God. and the rules that Gilead has put into place, where men are favored above all and women are looked at as a way to continue the population, basically. So anyway, she's reading all these terrible things about all these commanders, all of these gruesome, horrific things, crimes against humanity, war crimes, things like that. And like the commander she was slated to marry, Commander Judd, in his files she learns that he's killing off his wives so that when he feels like it, he can go get a new wife, a new young wife. And so Aunt Lydia, when she went to the house that day after hearing that Agnes was slated to marry Commander Judd, it was because she didn't want Agnes to end up dead. So as she's learning all these things, eventually another file that crosses her desk is kind of her family tree file. In that, there's a picture of her mother, who of course we know is Offred, but there's no name there. The name has been scratched out. And in there it says, you know, that Offred has they've twice tried to execute her unsuccessfully, and they believe that now she lives in Canada and is a Mayday operative. And as I read that, I was like, thank you. I was so happy to know that Offred, at least to the last of their knowledge, June of course, but in The Handmaid's Tale she's never called June, she's only called Offred, but we know that she's June from the show. So I was so relieved when I read that Offred had, at the very least, made it to Canada. Anyway, so in her file it also talks about how her sister, or stepsister, you know, however you want to look at it, other child was baby Nicole. And then it's after that that Lydia tells Agnes and Becca that Jade is baby Nicole. And from there, things really kick off. They really kick off. We find out that Lydia, of course, if you haven't pieced it together by now, Lydia is the insider in Gilead who has been helping the Mayday operative. She's the one that's been sending out information to them, accepting information from them quietly, slowly, painstakingly, building a case that will lead to the fall of Gilead. So the plan becomes that it's time to get Nicole back to Canada, and Agnes is going to be sent with her. And what they're going to do is they're going to say that a Pearl Girl mission, Becca and Agnes are going, and but it's actually going to be Agnes and Nicole going. And then they're going to say that Nicole ran away, that she eloped overnight with one of the Econo people, which are the regular people that aren't commanders in Gilead, and that, you know, she's gonna leave a note saying, I'm sorry, I couldn't do it, I would make a terrible aunt, and then they'll go from there. So what's actually gonna happen is Becca's just gonna hide out for at least 48 hours, and then by then Nicole and Agnes will have crossed the border and they can figure things out. As they're getting ready to do all this, Angus is constantly complaining that her tattoo is very itchy and it's really bothering her, so we're starting to get the idea that this is infected. And Aunt Lydia kind of says, you know what, we'll get you sorted out when you get to Canada, but for now, she takes a knife and the O of the god, she kind of cuts it, because remember how I mentioned they were raised letters, and she puts a very tiny microchip inside of it. And she kind of makes the joke that now you're my carrier pigeon, you need to get this over to the people, and the things on this microchip, it's all of the bad things that have been happening in Gilead over the course of however many years it has been in existence, and they're going to get that to the Canadian government, and it's hopefully all the proof that they need to tumble Gilead. And so it is quite the journey for Nicole and Agnes to get over to Canada. There's boats involved, you know, so much transport. Eventually they had to get off the main boat and just take like sort of a rubber dinghy and try to get to shore and hope they didn't get turned around in like the foggy weather and end up on the shore back in Gilead. And eventually when they make it, Nicole by this point is very sick. Eventually when she gets to a doctor, she finds out she has sepsis from the infection in her arm. And when she's in a bed, she kind of passes out, and when she wakes up, she can hear Agnes waking her and telling her to wake up. And when she does, Angus says, "Our mother's here." And we get this kind of nameless, very brief reunion with Offred and her two daughters, because saving Hannah, who is Agnes, was Offred's main objective. And we know that that was like at least 15 years ago, you know, and it's been so many years. And like, Offred being reunited with Nicole is great, that's wonderful, it's beautiful, but Offred being reunited with Hannah is everything. I was so happy to read that. But it's very brief. It's not, there's no focus on that, you know, it's a very brief scene because the book isn't about that. It's not about Offred, this book. And then that's kind of where things end for Agnes and Nicole back with Aunt Lydia. We know that it's happening. It's happening. The fall of Gilead. We know that Aunt Lydia has stolen a vial of morphine from the hospital because she has decided that when they come for her, which during her last chapter, she can hear their boot steps coming, and she's just waiting for that knock on the door. She knows when they come for her, they're going to torture her until they get the information they want from her, and she is not willing to give that information up. She has decided that she is going to take her own life before she lets that happen. And then that's kind of the end of their chapters. And then at the end of the book, there's, well, first of all, it's, you know, implied that, of course, Becca would have perished along with Aunt Lydia when it happened. And many, many years later, a statue is erected. And so the final chapter of the book is called the 13th Symposium. Which if you've read The Handmaid's Tale, you know what that is. It's kind of people talking about the events in the future. So it's like 2100s. They're talking about the events of the future, and they're trying to put together all of the pieces. And then someone says that they find a sort of statue erected, or like a plaque erected, and there's an inscription on it. And it says this: "In loving memory of Becca, Aunt Immortelle. This memorial was erected by her sisters, Agnes and Nicole, and their mother, their two fathers, their children, and their grandchildren, and in recognition of the invaluable services provided by A.L. A bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. Love is as strong as death." So that's just kind of a beautiful way to know that Agnes and Nicole went on to have wonderful lives, knowing and being near Offred. It also says, you know, it says their mother, but it also says their two fathers, which makes me think that maybe Nick also got out of Gilead and is part of Mayday now. Because of course we knew Luke did, we knew Luke was there, but maybe Nick's there as well. And we know they went on and had long lives with children and grandchildren of their own, living freely in Canada. And you guys, I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. And I hope you enjoyed this book talk. I'm going to make this outro real short because I have been going on for a long time, I know. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe if you want. That helps me out so much. And I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Bye, guys.